There we go.
So welcome everybody. Now that we're recording, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I think this should do it as the slide. I'm just going to share everything and we'll tab around if we have to. So I'm going to ask everyone, that's a good reminder, to open your West and your Lexis accounts if you can, because we're going to do some live practice with that. Swap our presenter and slideshow views. Okay, so you should all be seeing our famous drill instructor here for our research boot camp on your screen. I tried to go with the camouflage theme to keep it in service. I know different branches have different color camouflage, so not a favoritism thing here on my part. Just trying to be in theme. And to start out with, I thought I'd introduce myself. I'm going to have people read from the slides as we go, volunteers preferably, otherwise I will call on people because I have no heart when it comes to that. I'm a bit of a taskmaster. But I don't have people read this slide because I think it just makes me come off like an egomaniac when I have people reading my credentials, kind of giving me like a big hype at the beginning. So this is just my background. My primary work and practice was with employment law. And little did I know getting into that, dealing with administrative agencies would become such a huge part of my life. I took administrative law as an elective when I was at law school, and I kind of thought it would just be an interesting throwaway class because it's not on the bar exam. It's, just something to keep in my back pocket. But the truth of the matter is I learned in that class and within my practice that dealing with agencies is a huge deal. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. So if you have an opportunity to take an administrative law class, I'm going to put that here as a plug. I know everyone's got full schedules, but that's where I think my experience will be helpful today, is dealing with these administrative agencies and dealing with federal government research, which is something I also did in employment law. So to start out with, I just wanted to do a quick review of some of the concepts that you learned in your legal research and writing classes. Now, one of the things that's just a truism about legal education today is unless you take a clinic or are on a journal, you don't get a lot of training in legal research. There's the mandatory class you take when you're a 1L in both semesters, and that's nothing against those classes because they cover a lot of material, and we actually have a fantastic group of legal writing professors here. But aside from that, it's mostly subject stuff, things that you're going to see on the bar exam, core courses, and that is, of course, good to know and helpful, but it doesn't really help you when you're doing research for a case or working with a client. So this is why you'll hear some people say that the bar exam has nothing to do with the practice of law. If you've ever heard that criticism before, that's the reason why. Obviously, you need to get past the bar exam before you can use that. So that's why the focus in law school has been on that. So as you're working in a clinic or on a journal and doing some real legal research and helping real people, I like to just go over a review of this very quickly. So could I have a first volunteer to remind me what a secondary source is? I should note that everything that you need to know is on the slide, so it's really just reading off the slide, so no one be shy. Anyone want to be my first volunteer? Otherwise, I'll call on somebody.
I'll go ahead.
Go
So
ahead.
secondary sources are any materials that analyze, explain, or otherwise comment on primary sources. They are not the law.
Not the law. Okay, so secondary sources are helper materials, essentially. They are things that are going to point you in the right direction or explain a new and novel concept to you. Can anyone give me an example of a secondary source?
A restatement.
Restatement, good example. Anyone else?
Treatises.
Treatises, good example. Anything else?
Law review journals, maybe.
Law reviews and journals. Excellent. Yeah, these are all things that explain, comment, or otherwise point you towards the actual law. So generally, we're not going to cite them in our work, but they're very, very helpful to us. Now, the bulk of what we're going to talk about today are our primary sources, because that's in this specific area in the Veterans Clinic, you're going to be using a lot of primary sources of law. So that's where our focus is going to be. So what is a primary source? Anthony, do you want to keep going?
Absolutely. Primary sources are the law.
The law. Okay. So can anyone name a type of primary source for me?
A statute,
A statute. Okay. What else?
a case,
Case law. Very good. What else? And this is where we run into our first general hiccup, because what you've focused on so far in your legal career are the statutes and the cases, but there is more law out there that we're going to be covering today. We will do a review of statutes and cases later, but when we're thinking primary sources, we also have to take other things into consideration. Constitution, federal and state, statutes and case law, we've already said. And finally, agency rules and regulations are also primary sources of law that we have to be very concerned about, especially dealing with the type of law that you're dealing with right now. So I decided to start this presentation with the administrative law aspect of it, because I think that's going to be the least familiar based on most people's law school experience. So just as a very basic question, what is a federal administrative agency, or an agency just for short? Can I have a new volunteer? Anyone want to speak up?
I can do it.
Okay, go for it.
Agencies are created by federal statutes.
Yes, they are creatures. You might have heard the phrase creatures of statute, which to me sounds like a bad B horror movie, but they are created by Congress, basically. They pass a law creating an agency. Why don't you keep going?
A law statute is passed, creating the agency and charging it with managing or administering an area of law as intended by Congress.
So what does that mean exactly? Before we read the next block. Basically, Congress is saying, here is a law creating this agency. And this agency's job is to, within the limits of their mandate, their congressionally granted authority, govern this area of law, pass rules and regulations to make this area of law function smoothly. You might have also heard the term executive branch agency. I like to bring that here. And that's just because when agencies get their power, they get it from Congress. But as they are working on a day-to-day basis, they report to the president, the executive branch. So if you hear the term executive branch agency used interchangeably, that's why. Does that make sense to everybody? I see a couple of nodding heads. Again, if anyone has any questions, comments, things you want to bring up as we're going, you can shout them out and we'll address them. So now that we know what agencies are, they're bodies created by statute to manage an area. How does this happen? What do they do? Do we have another volunteer?
I can go.
Go ahead.
Promulgate rules and regulations in an area of law that they're charged with managing, and the rules have the power of law.
The power of law, and this is why we say they're a primary source, because they are the law. We have to obey them. It's not a secondary source where it's giving us advice or telling us what we should think about doing, or no, it's basically like a statute or a judicial decision. It is the law. Keep going.
So for example, Congress may pass a law saying that the Department of Veterans Affairs will provide medical services to veterans with cancer from exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam.
Okay, so we have a law passed by Congress, and I just made this up for the purpose of an example, so don't be looking for this exact law. So this is a big general outline, basically. So then what is the VA going to do about that?
So the VA will then pass rules to outline how the care will be handled and what veterans are eligible. So the VA may determine what kinds of cancers are caused by Agent Orange.
Stop there for 1 second. Okay, so when I say the VA might determine what kinds of cancers are caused by Agent Orange, what they're doing here would be to kind of outline who is qualified for treatment under this big general mandate law that Congress passed. Now, if there's scientific evidence that exposure to Agent Orange causes bladder cancer, that might qualify somebody. But if there's no scientific consensus that it causes, say, throat cancer, somebody reporting throat cancer might not qualify for healthcare under this law. So the VA would pass rules and regulations determining what kind of cancers are eligible for treatment under this general law passed by Congress. What else? Why don't we keep going to the next semicolon there?
What areas of Vietnam were exposed to Agent Orange?
Okay, so if somebody was serving in an area where Agent Orange wasn't used, would they necessarily qualify for relief under this law that Congress passed? So the VA might do the fine detail work here and pinpoint the areas where Agent Orange was used. And what's the final one there?
What years were Agent Orange used?
Okay, so if somebody served in 1971 and gets cancer, but Agent Orange wasn't used to 1973, again, I'm making these dates up, the VA could stipulate that, to qualify for funding under this, we're making a rule that it has to be from 1973 to 1976, because those are the only times Agent Orange was used. So do we see how an agency would make a rule based on the overlying rule statute passed by Congress? Basically, Congress is going to do the broad outline and the agencies are going to kind of fill in the details. Make sense?
I have a quick question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does it apply to when the agencies answer and it's recorded in a federal register, like to public commentary? Does that have the same weight, or is like a primary source because it's the agency answering?
So that's during the rulemaking progress. There's question and answers, and there's also public commentary periods, things like that. The Federal Register is kind of like I call it the rulemaking process, which is this overarching area. So that's when the rule is not in force yet. It is being debated. And it becomes a primary source of law when it's passed and entered into the Code of Federal Regulations. We're going to talk about that in a little while. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Can I just, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Blair, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to
Yeah.
mention that is a really important process because, and this is so important because a lot of you have, of course, we can't talk about our cases in particular, but we can talk, I can say at least that a lot of you have cases where your veterans received a bad discharge. Regulations govern whether they might be able to get benefits despite that discharge. And that rule is, VA is currently going through the rulemaking process with one of those really important rules. And we submitted comments in the fall about it. So it's just wanted to highlight that, how important these things are on our clients' lives.
Mm-hmm. So I put in this next slide, why is this okay? Because I know that to some people who are, still this is all fresh, you're early in your legal careers, this might sound a little weird, especially if you've just gotten out of con law. So can I have a volunteer to read this next slide? Someone who hasn't spoken yet?
I'll go.
Go ahead.
Some of you are fresh out of con law, so this must sound a bit fishy. Doesn't the Constitution say that only Congress can pass laws?
So, show of hands, how many people think that the Constitution says that only Congress can pass laws? How many people think that it doesn't say that? Well, Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution says all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States. All legislative powers, and that doesn't leave a lot of room for ambiguity. We say, you might have heard the term, let me advance here, non-delegation doctrine. Does anyone know that term? Basically, what non-delegation doctrine is it says that because Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution says all legislative powers are granted to Congress, Congress can't basically create sub-legislatures to make laws on their behalf. They can't delegate that power, non-delegation doctrine. So, I mean, it's when I say it's in the Constitution, it is right at the top of the Constitution. The Constitution starts, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union," that preamble that we all had to memorize in 5th grade. See a couple of people smiling, a couple of heads nodding. Right under that paragraph, Article 1, Section 1, all legislative powers herein are vested in Congress. Now, I've just been spending the first 15 minutes of this lecture talking about administrative agencies and rulemaking. So this doesn't really gel, because we've got administrative agencies, quote unquote, making rules or coming up with these kind of sub-laws. How do we square this with the Constitution? And the answer is, well, we get a little creative. So we have a problem here. We have a regulatory state. We have all of these administrative agencies, hundreds of them working. Why? How do we justify this? Do I have another volunteer for this slide?
I'll do it.
Go ahead, Ron.
The world is a very complex place. There simply is not time for Congress to get into the fine details on matters. For example, how many parts per billion of certain chemicals can be in tap water?
Okay, so whatever your political stripes, and we definitely try to stay apolitical here, one thing that most Americans can agree on is that Congress can't agree on anything. You know, Congress, you know, half the Congress wants Mexican for lunch, half the Congress wants Greek for lunch, and there's no middle ground. We can't agree on that. So coming to a big statement that everyone can agree on is important. Like, we're going to provide relief for people exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. That's good. But coming to those fine details, the how many parts per billion type stuff, there's just not enough time. We've got one Congress who's got to deal with every type of law under the sun. And taking the time to hash out those fine details, they'd pass one law a year, if that. So we have a problem with time. What's another problem? Why don't you keep going, Ron?
Even if Congress did have the time to legislate with that level of specificity, the average legislator is not a medical expert or a chemist or a geologist, etc.
Okay, so when you're in Congress, there are no there's an age requirement, but there's not really an education requirement for Congress. You can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer. It's like when you go into law school, you can basically come in with any major you want. You know, I'm a classical archaeology major. How does that square? Long story for a different presentation. So would we even want Congress necessarily coming up with how many parts per billion in the water? Does the average congressperson have any expertise with that? Or are they just going to say, we need the water to be safe? Oops. And advance. So it makes sense to let qualified experts working in a specific agency make the best choices based on science and other practical concerns. You know, this is the old joke. You know, when your toilet's broken, do you call a cardiologist? The answer is no. You call a plumber, because the plumber's the one who has the expertise, the specialization. But again, how does that square if these agencies are not allowed to make law? And there were a bunch of lawsuits back in the day saying, you know, why do we have to listen to these agencies? The Constitution says that only Congress can make laws. And this is one of my favorite things in the universe, is when the law gets creative, because I like to think of myself as an out-of-the-box thinker and one who comes to solutions. You know, I guess problem solving is in the nature of librarians and many attorneys too. So how does the law get creative and solve this problem for Congress? Who's our next victim here?
I'll go.
Go ahead.
The court came up with a workaround. When the agencies promulgate a rule, they are not legislating.
They're not making law. They're not legislating. What are they doing?
Congress legislates and a law is passed saying the water must be safe to drink. The EPA passes a rule based on that law saying that water cannot have more than Y part per billion of chemical X.
Yeah, that's just basically say 10 parts per billion or 11 parts per billion of a specific chemical. So the agency is not technically legislating. They're not technically making law. They're merely making rules enforcing legislation that was passed by Congress. So this is our little kind of creative workaround here, why this is okay. So has anyone ever heard this phrase, intelligible principle? I see a couple people nodding. So basically what the court said was that Congress passes a law, and within the boundaries of that law, that authority, the agencies can regulate, not because the agencies have power to make law, but because the agencies have the power to create rules to help enforce that law. Does everyone see what they did there? They got a little creative. That makes sense to everybody? So with intelligible principle, this is a silly example, but this is one that stuck with me when I was in school. Congress passes a statute. They have the legislative ability. Congress passes a law that says you must go north. Okay? So an agency can fill in using that authority to make rules about how you go north. They can say how many people can be in a car going north. They can say how fast you can go north. But can an agency then say, based on that authority, we want you to go west? And the answer is no, because the agency's rule-making power is only limited to what they can do under this governing principle, this intelligible principle that Congress laid out. So going west or creating laws about going west based on that rule that's on the statute that says go north, can't do it. They don't have that authority. But they can fill in the gaps about going north to facilitate making going north easier within that intelligible principle outlined by Congress. Does that make sense? I know that's very basic and silly, but sometimes basic and silly is what sticks. So that's what stuck with me. Everyone feel good about that? Questions, comments, things you want to talk about? Okay.
That's helpful, Isaac. That's really things I never thought about before.
Well, you know, it's not the kind of thing that would come up because it's basically, like I said, it is a creative workaround. You know, did the framers, when they were writing the Constitution, think that we were going to end up in an administrative state? The answer is probably not, no, or at least not to this degree. But science has advanced considerably since then. Clean water means different things in 2021 than it did in the 1780s. So it's a creative workaround. So most people wouldn't think of that, but that is why rules and regulations, first of all, have to be obeyed, and why they're able to exist in the first place. So does that make sense to everybody? Now I included this link over here. It's an A to Z list of all of the federal government agencies. I took a screenshot of V because that's veterans, obviously, is what you all are dealing with. So if you want to find out about agency information, you can go to that webpage, you know, and it's an A to Z index, so you can click on whatever letter, and you can click on the link and learn about that agency and see their webpage and things like that. So I thought that might be helpful if you want to examine the VA webpage or any of the subdivisions of the VA, these sub-agencies. So let's do a quick review of agency rules and how they're different from statutes. Do I have another volunteer? James, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Statutes are laws passed by Congress and signed by the president.
So that's the typical, when you think of a law, that's what one would typically think of, you know, before going to law school, you know, that, you know, it's the I'm Just a Bill from Schoolhouse Rock that we all had to watch as kids. What are rules and regs?
Rules and regulations are passed by agencies via a rulemaking process.
Okay, keep going.
Statutes and rules and regulations are the law primary sources.
So they're primary sources, so we have to be conscious of them and we have to obey.
Congress cannot delegate their legislative power to agencies, thus agencies cannot make law.
What can agencies do?
Agencies may, however, create rules and regulations to manage an area of law based on the will of Congress as expressed by their statutes. Intelligible principle.
Make sense to everybody? All right. So I want to go through a brief refresher on citations in general, and we're going to jump back into agency citations or rules and regulation citations. So this is going to be a throwback to your 1L classes. Can I have a volunteer for this?
Should it be my turn? It probably should be my turn.
Go for it.
In most instances, primary sources are issued a unique identifier or citation.
Okay. So this is Brown versus Board of Education, one of the most important and famous Supreme Court cases in the world, in the world of law. So basically, when people ask me to tell them what a citation is outside of law, when I'm lecturing to non-law students, I say a citation is an address. I used to say, if you wanted to find me, you'd look in the phone book, but that dates me a little bit. So now I say, if you want to find me, you would Google me and you'd find out my address. And if you went to that address, that's where you'd likely find me. So a citation is an address for a resource, a piece of law. And I say to my 1Ls, what part of what I want to teach you today is how to speak citation. So I started out lecturing the 1Ls by saying, where would you look for this citation? And inevitably someone says Westlaw or Lexis. And the answer is, okay, well, yes. But before Westlaw and Lexis, we did this in the books. And that's why citations are formatted this way. So if I'm looking for this citation, where am I going to look? Does anyone have any thoughts?
The U.S. Reporter.
The U.S. Reporter. Okay, that's good. United States Reports. But where in the United States Reports?
Is 347, does that refer to the volume?
That is correct. Volume number 347 of the United States Reports. And what does the 483 mean?
The first page of the case.
The first page of the case, yeah. So when I say, do you know how to speak citation, for cases at least, and for most other resources, you're looking at the volume, the name of the reporter, and the first page that it starts on. That varies a little bit, but it's the same basic formula for most things in the law. And again, the reason we made this system is long before computers, is when we were doing this in books. That's how you would find the book. You'd look along the shelf. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to go to the library and look for cases in print. And there's a big long list of books, a big long shelf full of books rather. And you look for book number 347 in the sequence of that reporter name, and you flip open to page 483 and you'll see Brown versus the Board of Education. That's what I say when I say speaking citation. So I have two just practice ones here. Does anyone want to give it a shot? Where am I looking for this first case? Same formula that we used for Brown. So it starts off with our volume number. Next is our reporter name, and then the first page. So if my professor gave me this citation, I would know to look in volume 976 of the Federal Reporter, second series, on page 86. And I can also tell that it was decided by the Second Circuit in 1992, but I don't really need that to find the case. I just need those identifier numbers. So volume number, reporter name, and first page. Who wants to try this second one down here?
I can do it.
Go for it.
Sure. So it would be volume 434 of the Federal Supplement Reporter.
Good.
The page number is 453.
Bravo. Perfect. So that's what we say when we're talking about finding citations and speaking this language of citations. So if someone gives you a task in the clinic and they give you a citation, you could find that in the books, or you could enter those citations in West or Lexis, and it will take you right to that case, because West and Lexis is essentially all of the books in one database. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's very similar with agency rules and regulations. We had somebody talk already about the Federal Register, which very impressed, by the way. I thought I was going to be dropping something new and blowing your minds with that today, but you're already on top of that. It's wonderful. So when a proposed rule comes out or updates during the rulemaking process, that's published in the publication, the Federal Register. And this is an example of what a citation to the Federal Register might look like. So we have our volume number, we have the name of the resource and the page. Make sense? It's the same idea. So if your professor says, hey, there was just a proposed rule, or hey, we want to comment on a proposed rule, where are you going to go to find that? You're going to go to the Federal Register, because it's not a rule yet, it's proposed. And if they have a citation for you, all the better, because you can just enter that into West or Lexis and find it. We're going to go into that in a little more detail. So that is for proposed rules, newly announced rules. But what about the final rules? So after something has become a rule, it's gone through the rulemaking process, we go to the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR. Is anyone familiar with the CFR? I see some nodding heads. And this is an example citation to the Code of Federal Regulations. Now there's a minor wrinkle here, but it is basically the same formula as we were talking about for case law citations. So we have basically the book that it's in, the name of the reporter or the name of the resource. And in this case, we don't do pages, we do sections. So this I would say Title 38, CFR, Section 174010. And I say title number because unlike the Federal Register and the case law reporters, we don't do this chronologically for the CFR. It's by topic. So the topic you need is in Title 38 for this one. It's pensions, bonuses, and veterans relief. So I would say Title 38, that's the book number, Code of Federal Regulations, name of the book or series, and in this case, the section number instead of a page number. Does that make sense to everybody? See some nodding heads. Do we feel confident that we could find something in the Federal Register or the Code of Federal Regulations? Yes, no, maybe?
Let's do it.
Agency rules and regulations online. I heard a request, let's do it. Well, let's do it. So the library has the Federal Register and the Code of Federal Regulations in print, but as a consequence of this being 2021, you'll probably be working mostly online. So our two major legal research databases, Westlaw Edge and Lexis+, they both have these resources on them, the Federal Register and the Code of Federal Regulations. And they're searchable, which is fantastic because you don't have to look at an index. You can basically Google style search them. So I put in a note for Hein Online here. They do have scanned copies of the book if you really need to see the book and how it's printed in the book for whatever reason. But for the most part, you're going to be doing research on Lexis and Westlaw. So I have a screenshot here from Lexis+, and I want to make it clear that I did the Federal Register as my Lexis example and the CFR as my West example, but you can use both platforms for both resources. But just as a time saver, I figured we would do one for each. So if you can all open up your LexisNexis in your browser. Now, if you start typing Federal Register in the main search box there, under sources, it should give you a suggestion for the Federal Register. And you can click on that and it'll take you right to a search template for the Federal Register. So you can use that to type in keywords or type in phrases to find things in the Federal Register. Or if you have the citation, for example, the one I gave, 66 FR 51893, you can simply type that citation into the search bar and search it, and it'll jump you right to that regulation. So why don't we try that? Can everyone type in their Lexis 66 space FR space 51893 and search it? And it should take you to an example of a proposed rule. Does that make sense? Does everyone feel confident that they could find the Federal Register template or just enter in a citation now that you know what the citation actually means? Okay. So now we're going to jump over to Westlaw Edge for the Code of Federal Regulations. And again, both you could use Lexis for this too, but just for the sake of example. It's a very similar way of doing it on Westlaw and Lexis. We like to joke that they're basically Coke and Pepsi. If one has it, the other one tries to have it, and because they're competing for your dollars after you graduate. So you can start typing in your search bar Code of Federal. You can see I did in my screenshot here, and they call it content pages in West, as opposed to sources in Lexis. But you can see Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, and you can click on that, and that'll take you to a search template. Now, when I say search template, what that means basically is instead of just searching all of Westlaw or all of Lexis for content, when you're in a search screen of a specific resource like the Federal Register or the Code of Federal Regulations, you're only searching that. So it significantly narrows your search from everything to just that resource. And that's the reason why we would limit at the outset like that to just that resource. So in this case, I gave the example 38 CFR 17.4010. If you want to run that search later, basically that's the way to jump right to a specific document if you have that citation. Because remember, a citation is like the specific address. You know, you can say Isaac lives in Merrick. So say Merrick is the name of the reporter. But if you want my specific address, you would need that specific citation. Does that make sense to everybody? I see nodding heads, so I'm going to take that as a good thing. So we've talked about agencies and rules and regs. I also wanted to do a brief refresher on statutes and case law. So a lot of this should sound very familiar to you. I'm gonna have a volunteer, someone who hasn't gone yet, or if we've gone through everyone, we can start over. Who hasn't gone yet?
I haven't gone yet.
Okay, so why don't you start and tell us what a statute is?
A law passed by a legislative body, specifically legislation enacted by any lawmaking body, including legislatures.
So in the federal system, of course, this is Congress. We saw in Article 1 of the Constitution outlines the legislature and vests all that legislative power in Congress. So Congress is the one that passes laws. You know how a bill becomes a law from con law and from growing up and going to elementary school and hearing the Schoolhouse Rock song. So a bill is proposed in one of the two houses of Congress, that's the Senate or the House. And when they agree on the language, it's sent to a president for his or her signature or veto. And the president if the president signs it, the bill becomes a law. And those are the statutes, the outline that we were talking about earlier, that can charge an agency, that can, well, first create an agency or charge an agency with doing something. So that's a brief review of what a statute is. So how do we find federal statutes? Do we have another volunteer? I think, have we gone through everybody already?
I think we have. We
Okay.
have.
So
Yes.
Good news, you get to go again, somebody. Who wants to go again?
I think Anthony was our brave first volunteer.
Yeah,
You feeling like going again,
I'll do it
Anthony?
again. I'll do it again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So federal statutes are published in the United
This
States.
is the United
C.
States Code, actually.
Mhm.
USC, I forgot a word there. I got to fix that. Federal statutes published in the USC, the United States Code.
West publishes the United States Code, annotated, and Lexis publishes the United States Code service.
Mhm.
Both have exactly the same law as the code. The only difference is that USCA has bonus commentary resources from West, and USCS has bonus commentary from Lexis.
So West and Lexis are not stupid corporations. They know that the USC is published for free by the federal government. That's your official citation here. For an example, 10 USC section 9285. So that, like in the CFR, we would say that's Title 10 of the United States Code, and then the section number where you can look it up. But West and Lexis said, well, if they're giving away all this good stuff for free, how can we make a buck on it? And the answer is they have their own versions with commentary. So we're going to go into the next here. Why don't you continue, Anthony, because it's kind of on the same topic.
Sure. We always cite to the United States Code because it's official.
Right. So if we're citing things to a court or to a partner, we cite to the United States Code. That's the official version published by the government. But keep going now.
When doing research, we use the USCA or the USCS. We
Why?
do this because the extra resources and commentary point us to other helpful sources.
Correct. So when I said West and Lexis thought about this and said, how are we going to make a buck on this? Basically, they came out with their own versions of the statutes that, first of all, update faster than the print USC. And second of all, have this bonus commentary, which they get some famous or very knowledgeable attorney, judge, whatever, to write additional commentary, and they link you to other Westlaw products that might help you. Basically, it's sort of like having a secondary source attached to your primary source to help you. And if you're doing research, that's a real time saver. And you can see that, I'm going to scroll back to my other slide, that it's basically the same looking, the same look of a citation. It's Title 10, USC, or A or S for the Lexis, and then your section number. It's going to take you to the exact same law. So that's why we cite to the USC, but we go to West or Lexis for their bonus content. Does that make sense to everybody? And you can enter a citation as a USC citation into either one of these, and they'll take you to that citation just in their version of it. Same law, just with extra commentary. Make sense?
Yes. That's
Okay.
helpful because I've seen people cite USCA or USCS in their briefs, and I always, kind of wonder what I didn't realize it was related to the corporations like that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to scare anyone unnecessarily. A court is not going to, the clerk's not going to come out in open court and light your brief on fire if you cite the USDA or USCS. They're not going to throw your brief out, but it's just a matter of it's technically Blue Book correct and most
Right.
courts correct to cite to the US. And again, you're citing the primary law, you're citing the statute, you're not citing the commentary. And maybe once in my years of practice, I've cited commentary, and only because it was absolutely necessary to make a point, but you want to cite the law because that's what has the precedential value. Does that make sense to everybody? So again, like the Code of Federal Regulations, we do have it in print in the library, but Hein Online also has scanned copies of the USC. So if for whatever reason you need to see what it looks like in the book, you can use the Hein version to get it there online. Make sense to everybody? We all feel good about how to locate federal statutes and how to cite them? So now we've had our quick review on statutes, I want to go on a quick review of case law, since you're going to be dealing with some courts that you might not have had exposure to when you were doing your 1L research. So do I have another volunteer/victim for this slide?
I could do it.
Okay, Ron, go ahead.
Case law is a body of law comprising the results of judicial decisions, orders, and judgments. Case law is sometimes called judge-made law or common law.
Yeah, because they're made by judges. Here's my little judge. Go ahead.
No, it's all you.
So American courts are descended from the English courts, essentially. Basically, we were English colonies once, and we kept their legal system after we gave King George the boot. So what that means is that we look at, in the English or American systems, the common law systems they're called, we look at past judicial decisions to examine what the law should be. And the reason we do this is all about consistency. How many people have heard the phrase equal justice under the law? It's one of those phrases that everyone kind of grows up hearing. And the way we get equal justice under the law is through consistency. So no matter what your race, your religion, your background, if a court decided a case one way in the past, you should be entitled to that same justice in the present. And as long as the facts are substantially similar. So that's what we say, that's the reason why we use precedent, basically. That is our shot at equal justice. Because he got it or she got it one way then, how come I have it different now? And the answer is, assuming that the facts are the same or substantially similar, you shouldn't. The outcome should be the same. And it shouldn't matter if you're green, purple, what religion, whatever. That's equal justice under the law. That's precedent. And that's why case law is important. Make sense to everybody? So you might be asked to find by your professor or someday by a partner in a law firm or your senior associate in a law firm, what did Court X say on this matter? And if you're anything like me, when I first got out of law school, that was a panic attack, because how do I know what Court X said? And the answer is that you use your legal research skills. So please tell me what Court X says about this topic. Now, it's really a matter of how you frame things with something like this. And what I mean by that is, am I freaking out now because the professor told me to find something so specific? Or am I going to be incredibly relieved that they just basically said, you need to find one thing. I don't care what all the other courts said. I just need to find this one thing. And I choose to believe that this is a blessing, not a curse. Because if your professor gives you an assignment that says, give me a survey of what every federal court said about this issue, that is, that is, you're looking for a window to jump out of at that point, because it's 13 circuit court, innumerable district courts, plus the Supreme Court. But if your professor said, what did the Fifth Circuit say about this? That's one. That's one. And that basically, they've done a whole bunch of your research for you. So your job at that point is only to search for that one court and deliver the law. Now, that's all well and good, but since you're in a very specific area in the Veterans Clinic, you might hear about some courts that are unfamiliar to you. So for example, in your legal research and writing court, you might have dealt with a federal district court or the circuit court for the Ninth Circuit, so you feel comfortable finding things like that. But what if we throw a little bit of a wrinkle? So your professor asks you, what did the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims say about that? Who wants to take over reading here? Come on, someone be brave. We've done so well without having me call on people.
I don't think Jackie had to read yet. I see Jackie.
Okay, Jackie, it sounds like you've been officially thrown under the bus. So let's go.
Okay. Lexis U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims and Westlaw, U.S. Court of Appeals for Veteran Claim. Oh wait, the boxes are in the way. Okay, you can start typing U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims into the search and you should see the name of the court.
Right, so these links are actually live. So when your professor posts the the slides, you can click on them, and as long as you're logged into Lexis or West, it'll take you to the template for those courts. You can also start typing in U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, and it's going to pop out in that kind of, do you mean this, the recommendations box down there. So I put the names of the courts on the slides for Lexis and West because sometimes they call them slightly different things. So that's what they're called on that database. And I put also a sample citation. So if you happen to see this citation over here, what do you know about this? Can someone be brave and tell me what this citation means?
Yeah,
Go for it.
it's in the 33rd volume of the Veterans Appeals Court reporter, I guess. Is it still called a reporter?
Reporters report. Yep.
For them on page 65.
Correct. Fantastic. So if somebody sends you, opposing counsel sends you a brief and they cite something like this, you'll know exactly where to find it. You can type that citation into West or Lexis, but that's what it means. It's in volume 33 of the Veterans Appeals Reports on page 65. So that's one court that might be specialized that you'll deal with. What about the Federal Circuit? Somebody else, what does the Federal Circuit do? You could read the quote up at the box from their website.
I could go.
Go for it.
Appeals to the court come from all federal district courts, the United States Court of Federal Claims, the United States Court of International Trade, and the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims.
So the court that we just talked about appeals up to this court. And you can go to it on West or Lexis with those links, or start typing Federal Circuit cases into the search. And I gave two examples of citations here. So the Federal Circuit official reported decisions go to the Federal Reporter, which is an example here. It's volume 979. Federal Reporter is F. 3D means third series, which means they've gone from 1 to 999 and then started a new series at 1 again, and the page number that it starts on. So that's for reported cases. Now, courts also come out with decisions that they don't report for various reasons, but we still keep track of them because they still have precedential value. So if you're looking for an unreported case, you might see this, Federal Apps, which is the Federal Appendix. Is, believe it or not, there is a special reporter for unreported cases. Beat that with a stick. So you'd be looking at, for example, in this one, volume 611 of the Federal Appendix on page 1000 for an unreported case. So Federal Reporter and all of the series, the first, second, and third, and Federal Appendix are places you can find precedent for the Federal Circuit. Reported goes to Federal Reporter, unreported to Federal Appendix. And finally, as we're running out of time, the United States Supreme Court, which of course is on Lexis and Westlaw because it wouldn't be much of a database if we didn't have Supreme Court precedent. And again, if you just type US Supreme, they'll drop down into those boxes. And an official site for the Supreme Court, we saw with Brown versus Board of Education before, is to the US reports, 347, volume 347 of the United States Reports on page 483. Now, I just wanted to make one final note here about the Supreme Court reporter. That is a reporter that is basically churned out as fast as possible because we want to get Supreme Court precedent out there because it's so important. So if you see something cited to the Supreme Court reporter, that means it's probably a newer case and it hasn't gotten a US report citation yet. So where available, we cite to the US reports. If that's not available yet, we go to Supreme Court reports. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I know we had to rush a little bit there at the end, but we are running out of time. So I will put it out there for questions, comments, things you want to talk about either now or in the future. You can always reach out and contact me. I'm in 100G in the library if you're on campus, or you could email or call my extension. There is a mistake on some of the library maps saying that my office is next door to where it's supposed to be. My advice to you, if you're confused, is if you walk in and there's a toilet, that's the one that's not my office. So anyone have any questions, comments, things you want to talk about now? Okay, I'm going to fix that typo and I will send these PowerPoint slides to Professor Thompson. Thank you for sitting through all that. I know it's a lot in a short period of time, but that's what boot camp is.
Thank you, Isaac. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Happy to do it.